Business Club, and also run a couple of other businesses. One is Simplified Recruitment, and the other is a photography business. But today we're here for the chat show, and how the chat show works is our members and guests of Bobby's Business Club get the chance to come on and talk about who they are, what they do, and how they help their clients. And the reason why we have a separate program or separate product for the presentations is because our meetings are only 1 hour long. And what that means is we have more time to talk. And what we do in our meetings, which are fortnightly on a Tuesday, we split up the time evenly between all the members and guests on the screen, and you get that time to talk. So it could be 3 minutes, could be 4 minutes, and it could be 5 minutes. And so we like to create an environment that means that you can talk more about who you are and what you do, which then increases the likability and the like, know, and trust, which means that we can do more business together. And only this week, we finished off Bobby's Business Club, and we had a questionnaire that went out, and the members of Bobby's Business Club actually rated Bobby's Business Club 4.9 out of 5, which I'm very proud of. So next year, you should come along, come and see why we are rated so highly. And what's really cool is in that questionnaire, we asked our members, did they do work with each other, or did they do referrals to each other? And 80% of our members have either done referrals to each other or worked with each other. So if you want to come along and see how that works, then please do next year. But that's enough about me. I'm going to hand over to my co-host, Karen. Do you want to do a bit of an intro about yourself?
Thanks, Bobby. So my name's Karen White. I'm a life coach. I'm based in Singapore. I help professional women who are in that corporate space. So you're in one or two minds. You love what you're doing in corporate, but there's also a part of you that's thinking, I want more. So maybe you don't love it so much as you used to, and you're starting to realize I want that next step and I'm not sure how to do it. Might be a promotion, negotiate a salary. Maybe you're feeling a bit of an imposter coming in and really pulling you back. But then you also might be like I was in the end, which was a person that's in corporate that just starting to realize that you're kind of done with it and it's time to take those next steps. And so that's who I help. It's not saying that one or the other is the better choice. It's about where you're at. So that's mainly what I do, is helping those professional women. Sort of usually over 35 is when you're starting to look for those changes, and that's kind of the place that I focus on. So yeah, thanks, Bobby. Excited to be here. Welcome, Jenny.
Yeah, it's exciting. And this show is not about us. We're just to host this, and we host amazing people to come along on this show to tell us who they are and what they do and how they help their clients. And we have Jenny Moutou here, and she's I know Jenny from networking from BX. And if you haven't gone to a BX meeting, I highly suggest you go to it. They're very productive. You can meet some great people. If you would like a pass to go to one of the events, you can either reach out to myself, you can reach out to Jenny, and we'll arrange for you to come and meet some great people. But Jenny, over to you if you want to introduce yourself, and then the floor is yours whenever you're ready.
All right. Thank you, Bobby. And it's such a pleasure to be here. So thank you very much for the opportunity. Hi, everybody. As Bobby said, my name is Jenny Moutou, and my business is She Leadership, and very much based on the foundations of empowering women to succeed. That is a lot to do with leadership. It's quite an interesting conversation, because when we say leadership, there's so many women who don't identify with being a leader. In fact, going back probably about 18 months now, I did a presentation to a group of small business owners and asked them how many of them identified with being a leader, and was really surprised to see how many didn't actually put their hands up and claim that title. So I work on the presupposition that the term leadership is a little bit, how can I say, needs redefining. Let's put it like that, Bobby. And what we've previously identified as leadership really hasn't evolved into people who are not self-serving, who are there, for the benefit of the greater good, as opposed for just themselves. So part of my mission and the work that I do is about cultivating that leadership and confidence in women in particular. And my goal is to create leaders who are good in the world and good for the world. So that's the basis of my business. And so today, what I wanted to talk to you about is to get beneath the hood, I guess, of what that actually means. And I'm going to do a little presentation around a book that I'm writing at the moment. And I'm going to share my screen with you, and this will help give some depth to where I'm coming from when I say leadership development. So just give me a minute here. Okay, can you see that all right?
Yeah, perfect. And it's in the right mode as well. So it's just the slides.
Excellent. Okay. So the book I'm writing is called The Hangovers of Trauma, and it's all about how to train your mind to see what's real. And I've chosen this topic because I've come from a background of having experienced a lot of trauma in my life. And certainly there's a lot of books that have been written about trauma, which is really wonderful because we all experience trauma and deal with that or don't deal with it, as the case may be, in our own way. For me, I've learned that trauma is also very contextual. So for instance, the trauma that you experience as an adult, let's say, through a separation or through a redundancy at work, is very different from the trauma that you experience in childhood. And the two, are not comparable in that sense. And there's a little bit of misconception in people around that. And I think it's important to explain some of the differences. So trauma that you experience as a child, particularly under the ages of 7, are affecting you in what they call the formative years of life, right? So this is a time when you are basically soaking in everything about the world around you, and you're making connections in the brain. So you're forming neural pathways, and everything that you see, you experience is all going towards creating that context of life. So when we experience trauma as a child, that affects the brain development. There's a bunch of science on this that you can research and read. And my book isn't about the science. My book is actually about being human and learning to create this distance between you and what you're experiencing so that you can make empowered decisions and take empowered action. So the premise of the book is really understanding those impacts that trauma has and then being able to distance yourself from that. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah. So today what I want to share with the readers or the viewers is around looking at this context and how context creates reality, and then looking at how to identify the victim mindset. Because there's some things that I've learned around the victim mindset that are a default mechanism. And if we can start to recognize that, we can start to build a framework for not falling into those traps. And then I'm going to look at the plight of the people pleaser. So I know for myself, that's definitely been a curse, if you like, and something I've experienced and really had to learn to navigate what that looks like and how I can transition out of that sort of mindset. All right, so let's start with context. So context, let's relate to context as a container. And that container is often invisible. So if you think about the timeline of your life from the moment you were born, and possibly even from the moment of conception for some people who have the awareness to know what went on before then, right through to where you are now, there's a whole series of events that occurred. There are things that you witnessed, things that you heard, ways that you were in the world, and things that you interpreted about that creates this context that you live in. But most of us don't understand or see that context. And so I use the case of the vase, which is creating that container of you and how you live, and shapes your point of view, essentially. So everything that you're experiencing in the world is coming through this point of view. And that context is the soil from which we develop our understanding of who we are in the world, but also how we relate to other people in the world. What's interesting about the context, and particularly when it remains invisible to us, is that in order to shift the paradigm of that particular container, sometimes we'll go through things that threaten our safety. And whether that safety is real or imagined, it doesn't matter, because we're responding to it like it is real. And so that can keep us contained, within this context of just this one realm of reality. Now, inside of that context is everything that's possible and also everything that's impossible for us, right? And so if you're raised with particular conditioning that says that you will never amount to anything, then the aspiration to be an astronaut or a scientist or, whatever it is out of your realm of possibility. So I want to take Dylan here, for example, right? So Dylan is born into a family where his parents tell him that the only way to succeed in life is to get a good job that pays well. So he studies, and he studies in a field not of his choosing, but one that he thinks that his parents are going to approve of and that he's going to maintain their love and connection with, right? And then he goes to work in an industry that he ends up despising. He hates going to work. And it's a bit like what Karen mentioned at the beginning, you know, with the women who get to their 30s or their 40s and they're starting to evaluate and question, is this all there is in my life? But because there's this conditioning and these values that have been instilled and these beliefs that have been instilled inside of that, breaking out of that mold is going to take a tremendous amount of energy, courage, you know, willingness to be uncomfortable. And for some people, that threat is just too great. So they just stay where they are and they resign themselves to this is the way it is and there's nothing I can do about it. So one of the first principles that I work with is self-awareness. And of course, you know, awareness without action changes nothing. So there are many people that I meet who have done, and just like myself, who've done years and years of personal development, but their life still isn't changing. They still aren't where they want to be. They're not getting what they want. And so all of that awareness actually hasn't taken them any further to where they want to be. And often because that context that they're living in, that's forming the paradigm, right? And so you're doing different things or you're taking actions, but they're all within that paradigm and nothing new is happening, you know? So when we can start to see the paradigm itself, then you can take a step back. Then you can make new decisions because you understand there's a pattern that's repeating and you get to see what it's going to take to sort of break down those patterns. And we'll go through that in a little bit of detail towards the end, but I think it's important to understand that those loops and how you can recognize them is you're having the same conversations with yourself or with other people over and over again. You're feeling the same types of things over and over again, and you're not taking any actions and you're not making any decisions. You know, just on that, you know, as a coaching client, I'm sure you can relate to this, Karen. Like often I'll ask people, what do you want? And 99.9% of the time, their response is, well, I don't want this and I don't want that, right? And maybe it's part of being human, who knows? But the way to tackle this is to keep pushing those barriers of discomfort and being able to challenge yourself. And, you know, in my teachings, I sort of show people about that's really living your potential, is being able to constantly expand your circle and go beyond those borders and those limits that are containing you. So then we move into the victim mindset, and all of this, bear in mind, is interrelated. It's all happening at the same time and different things are triggering us at different times. I find it really interesting to see a lot of the rhetoric that comes out with people being triggered. It's almost like they have the attitude that they want to send the rest of the world to counseling to fix them, as opposed to taking responsibility for how they're being triggered and what that's actually meaning for them. So if you can understand that we've all got our own version of that container and that context, what's happening out there is really a teaching opportunity for what can be examined in here. And so this victim mindset, I think it'll be familiar with the whether you're acting above the line or below the line. And so generally, if you're above the line, you're accountable and responsible. If you're below the line, you're laying blame and justifying. And, you know, when you're either being that way, laying blame or justifying, or you're hearing other people, it's usually vocal, right? We're usually complaining about something. It tends to be fairly obvious. So with levels of awareness, we can start to develop a way of being that allows us to take responsibility for what's going on. I think there's a book out there called Extreme Responsibility or Extreme Ownership. which is on this basis, right? So it also allows us to develop a level of self-control, and to modify our behavior. So what are the responses that we're eliciting in other people as well? And how can we modify that to be more amenable to good relationships? Sometimes, if we're prone to laying blame and justifying, it's that we simply don't have a blueprint for how to be in a particular situation. And that might mean just asking somebody, hey, when this happens to you, how do you manage that situation? So is there another way for me to be? And how can I use the people around me and understand how they respond to situations to be able to do things better? So in that way, we'd cultivate that response until it becomes a habit and try it out. I've got on the slide here, you might be familiar with Stephen Covey, and in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he talks about between every action and reaction, there's time and space. And that time and space gives us an opportunity to assess and to look for the feedback. So for me, if I'm in a situation where something's happened and it's triggered me for whatever reason, I use that time and space as an opportunity to consider what's really happening here. What am I reacting to? And I've had this automatic, response, but let me just hang back and take a closer look at this. So I'll give you an example. I was in a situation going back a couple of years now where we were in a workshop, and there were 3 people. So myself, another lady, and a gentleman. And we had to look into each other's eyes. So you can imagine, as a threesome, if you like, one person is going to be, watching and observing while the other 2 are engaged. And I found myself in a situation where I was looking at the woman and I had no problem, staring at her or looking into her eyes. And then I was looking at the man, and I was having a physiological response to that, right? And it took a moment as I was looking at him where I had the awareness to go, hang on, what's really happening here? And there's no talking in this exercise. And so as I'm looking at this gentleman, I realized that my automatic and my physiology is responding to, I'm not safe. And I thought, wow, isn't that interesting? What about this situation is not safe? And it's interesting because at that moment, it's like I'm having a conversation with myself, but I'm having a conversation with the 7-year-old version of myself, And so it's like, okay, what about this situation's not safe? And then I have a look around and I realize, well, there's enough physical space between me and this person. And, it's funny where the mind goes. And if anything were to happen, or if I was not to be physically safe anymore, I could punch him out. I probably shouldn't say that. But, that's what's going on. So it's almost like this conversation of this reassurance for this 7-year-old self that you're okay. Everything is okay. So the feedback from the body was my cue to understand myself better and to understand this automatic response of what was happening, and then to choose what response I was going to, to proceed with, as opposed to just react. Does that make sense? Yeah. And oftentimes that feedback, we misinterpret that feedback. Instead of looking at that feedback as an opportunity to get to know ourselves better and to understand how we're wired and to see more of that paradigm that's in place, we just react. And that opportunity is lost. So, as I said, there are times where, I myself have found myself in a position where I'm like a deer in headlights. Something's just happened and I don't know how to respond. And I've learned, you know what? It's just that I don't have a blueprint for that. And so how can I get a blueprint for how to be in that situation? Well, I just go and ask people, how do you do this? When this happens to you, what do you do there? And I start to get a feel for how people manage and deal with certain situations that are foreign to me. And by doing that, I get to know that person better, but I also get to understand myself better. And then I'll go and test and measure. So I'll do the Jenny version of what our discussion was about, and I'll see, how do I feel after that? Have I been able to maintain a level of power and control for myself, you know, and work with that way? So the next level of the victim mindset is looking at these default behaviors and feelings. And I won't go, I just use that example of the, reacting to the safety mechanism that triggered all of that. So it's understanding those narratives, those feeling states, and often it will be triggered by something that's happened in the past that's familiar to you. And so you get into that level of powerlessness and lack of control. So if you can understand, or you can get this awareness that what's underneath that, what's underneath those triggers, what's underneath that feeling is this sense of powerlessness, then you can sort of reflect and see, right, is this true? Am I really powerless? Am I really losing control here? Because we always go back to time and space. We always have a choice in that place. Now, if you are in that victim mindset, then very often those default behaviors or feelings might trigger responses. So I don't know what you're like, Bobby and Karen, but those default behaviors or feelings might be things like aggression, and you go on the attack because, if you're in that victim mode, that might be appropriate. You withdraw or go silent. You implode because you don't actually express your emotions and you bottle them up over time. Or you gossip. It's almost like a passive aggressive response. And I'm sure there are a lot of others, but this just kind of gives you that example of what goes on for people. And, what I'm starting to see from myself is that this victim mindset, particularly if you're coming out of childhood trauma, is almost like an unidentified learned behavior, because something happened that you didn't have any control over at some point. And it's that learned response. So until you can see that actually, no, I can take back power and control for myself as opposed to surrendering it, then there's some steps for me out of this. So I can acknowledge I'm feeling this way because, and I might feel like I'm powerless or I don't have control of my destiny or fate. So just acknowledging that, expressing that without identifying with it. So can I tell myself how I'm feeling and allow it to be what's so, as opposed to this is who I am? No, this is just simply how I'm feeling right now in this moment. And in 5 minutes from now, I'm going to feel a different way and I'm going to have a different conversation. So it's not the truth. It's simply a truth. And it might be just simply the story you're telling yourself. And the story you're telling yourself isn't always the truth, right? It's just convenient sometimes. So the steps to move out of this is around beginning to challenge that narrative, like really what's going on here? What do you want from this situation ultimately? What's a quality question that you could ask yourself? Anthony Robbins is synonymous with saying you ask a quality question, you will get a quality answer. And your brain is wired to answer the questions that you ask it. So whether those responses make sense or not. So how can you form some quality questions to elicit, and that's a habit as well. So that when you're in that moment of being triggered, you start to cultivate that as a skill. And then what new decisions can you make? So in that example where I am looking in the eyes of this gentleman and having a physiological response, I have the opportunity to make a new decision. And in that moment, the new decision was, I'm safe. I'm going to take a deep breath and just relax, And yes, all of those feelings are still going through my body, but I'm safe, So I want to move to the plight of the people pleaser, because as I said, all of this is interconnected, and certainly, a lot of my story as well. So if you've ever identified with being a people pleaser, you'll know that very often it's about putting other people's agendas, other people's goals, other people's wants ahead of yourself. And there's a very big threat of being yourself when you're a people pleaser, because What if you're not accepted by others because of what you believe, because of what you say, because of how you dress, and I think that when we look at the landscape of young people out there today, that this is a pandemic, of people trying to be something they're not. And there's a real lack of self-acceptance because they're trying to fit into somebody else's model of the world for how they should be. In my own experience, that resulted in years and years of contorting who I am, right? And it was painful and exhausting. So, I wonder if your viewers are going to recognize some of this in themselves. So the people pleaser can't say no, doesn't set boundaries very well, gets hit with, gets the guilts when they can't do what, or they say no, or they refuse to do something that somebody's asked them to do. And I guess it's important to understand that you can't control other people's reactions or responses. And ultimately, you have a right to be human without having to apologize for your existence or to justify why you will or won't do something. But that can be difficult when you're in that people pleaser mode. Many of the women that I speak to about being a people pleaser and just being in relationships, this is prolific for them. That guilt is prolific. And it's because it becomes this vulnerability, and the person that they're interacting with knows that. So they'll push that button and they'll test that time and time and time again. I'm watching a great series on Netflix at the moment called Janet King. And I love Janet King. Like, she is my heroine right now. The way that woman goes about her business, just does what she needs to do, says it straight. You'll love her or hate her, but I just love the position that she's coming from. She's playing this character of female empowerment and not having to apologize and being damn good at her job as well. So it's check it out if you haven't seen it. So some of the questions that I'd like you to consider, is, can you love yourself exactly as you are and exactly as you're not? I think self-acceptance is one of the biggest things that we struggle with as being human. Can you love yourself without having to earn your love? Are you in a performance-based relationship with yourself? And I think that that's also something, like there's many people who feel like they have to do something to be able to feel good enough about who they are. What if you just did nothing? So when you're people pleasing, you often invest time, money, energy, and emotion into other people and other relationships. But when that's not reciprocal, it drains your energy. And either you become resentful or the other person becomes resentful because they're not getting enough from you. Or when you finally decide enough is enough and you stop, that's going to cause an upset too, right? And you've got a whole new realm of issues to deal with then. And that can also trigger that victim mindset, and it draws you back into that sense of powerlessness and loss of control. So when you can't say no and you end up sacrificing your priorities and goals for other people's agenda, it's not wrong and it's not bad. It's just what's so, and if you can keep it in the what's so bucket without contaminating it with the victim mentality, then the minute you decide no more, everything changes. So just one last sort of slide that I want to finish on, because one of the things that I've learned from myself is that the minute that you disrupt the status quo, so the minute you stop being a people pleaser, or the minute you decide you're not cooking for the family after working 2 jobs and being completely exhausted at the end of the day, it's going to cause an upset, and that is par for the course. And if you understand that that's the mechanism and you expect somebody's going to get upset somewhere, then you can just get on with things and expect it, take it in your stride and just keep going, rather than allowing that upset to shun you back into that people-pleasing mode of having to do something to appease another person. So if there's anything that you take away from this, It is that when you disrupt the status quo, you will cause an upset. And just be responsible for that. So here are some questions. If you're a people pleaser and you're looking for that pathway to self-love and self-acceptance, here's some questions for you. So what actions are you doing that you could stop doing? What aren't you doing that you could start doing? Are you actually communicating your needs and your wants? There's so many times where we make assumptions that people should just know what we want or how we feel. And we actually haven't even bothered to communicate. And then what behaviors or responses could you test out? So that might be practicing saying no. It might be getting some strategies for how to deal with situations and asking people around you. And it's not always about knowing the answers in advance. Sometimes you're just going to have to try it out and see what works and what doesn't work just for you. And it's always about, like, what are you willing to do? And can you hear the feedback about yourself? And that's the accountability and the responsibility. So yeah, that's what I wanted to share with you today, because I thought, you know, this kind of gives a bit of insight of what people can start to do to cultivate this leadership for themselves and drive their own goals and ambitions and the things that they want for themselves by starting in these places of being able to know thyself, loving thyself, and then also accepting thyself. So Bobby, that's it from me. A little bit around if anyone wants to connect with me, that they can do so via email or LinkedIn. So I'm really curious. Do you have any questions for me?
Lots of questions.
Yeah.
Lots of questions. And thank you so much for presenting what your book is about, and also having a glimpse into your life and understanding, you know, where you've come from and how far you've come to be the person you are today. And you're obviously taking your own advice, and that's sometimes the hardest thing to do. We can give the advice out very easily, but sometimes it's very difficult to do it ourselves. But what I found very interesting was, and I relate this to wildlife, is we've got birds here called plovers or plovers, and they nest on the ground. They don't nest in the, you know, they're silly, but you walk past them, they go bonkers because they think you're going to attack them or their baby, right? And so, but when the baby grows up, they do the same thing. And so we have to be careful what we do, because what we do is what our children will do. And so that might be the wrong thing for them to do, but they've done it for generations and generations and generations. It's the same as when you've got whales or dolphins, they'll go to a certain feeding point. But if their parent took them to a feeding point where there was no food, then that child will die at some point because there's no. So we have to be really careful with the things that we do. And I have a question for you about, no, it wasn't a question, but more a statement. And because we all network, and this is said around a lot, you know, find the people who are like-minded, who are like you. And once you start to do that, we don't have to be people pleasers, because we around people who like us for who we are and what we do, and we can be our true selves. That can be really difficult though, because we feel like people won't like us. But you've just got to go out there and meet a lot of people to build that connection around you. And I found that so powerful when you were talking about it, that we all people please in networking. We all kind of like want to help people out and etc. But when you find the true people who support you, like Karen messaged me yesterday, hey, can you help me with this job form? I will do anything for Karen because she helps me, and we meet and stuff like that. And so you do it because you don't mind helping people who are the same type of people. And there are people out there who will just take, and you've got to learn to kind of find those. So I have a question for you. Why this program and why now?
Yeah, I see a lot of potential in a lot of women. And, you know, as I said, part of my message, part of what I want to do is redefine what leadership is. And for me, when I look out in the community, I see women working at grassroots levels in more empathic kind of fields of work that are empowering their communities, who don't have the fame, who don't have the fortune, who don't have the glory, but are amazing leaders and amazing members of society. And my goal is to create more of an ecosystem of women helping women that is representative of the diversity that we have in our communities. And I don't think that that's reflected enough. you know, in what we see in pop culture, basically.
Karen, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I just want to say, like, thank you. Thank you for sharing like your journey and touching on those. I think when you give examples that can really help people resonate with that, like your one about recognizing that person not understanding, and I think that can sometimes be the hardest thing. As you were talking through your different examples and sharing, I'm thinking, I know myself, and I also can see it with others that I work with and others I'm around, that often what happens is you have that reaction, like you said, and then it goes. Like you feel really uncomfortable at that time, and then maybe that afternoon you'll gossip about it. Like when you said that, I'm like, yep, you'll go down that track, and then it's all better again. So you don't do anything, and then and then it happens again, and again you go down another track or whatever it might be, and you blame whatever it might be, but you never really stop for a moment. So like you shared, at one point or another, something happens in your life that makes you actually have to stop and pause, and you have now learned for yourself, no, hang on a minute, what's happened with me, like what's going on, and gone back into yourself. And that in itself is quite a long journey to get to that point, I think. And I really appreciate you sharing that, because I think there'll be people that we like, oh, that's all good to say, but I'm fine now, or whatever. And it's really, I think, just continuously sharing this message. And like you were sharing, you've got that group where you're bringing women together to support them, because I think when you do, I'm assuming that with your leadership group, it doesn't have to be a certain type of person or that, but they're going to have to want to dive deeper, because I think when it comes to the word leadership, people are like, yes, I'm going to be the leadership of my own life. I'm going to be the CEO of my life, but there's so much more to it. You can't just go there without starting here first. And I think like Bobby was saying, it's not so much like a question, it's a statement. It's more just saying like, thank you for sharing that and just opening that up. And I think what you're wanting to do and what you're wanting to talk about is going to resonate with so many people, because people pleaser is a thing. And I really appreciate your visual at the beginning about like having that vase and talking about that paradigm, you know, the identity that we've created for ourselves, that we don't allow ourselves to step outside. And like for me, being around people like Bobby, you know, he's just a person who has a million ideas all the time and is constantly doing things. When you're around people like that, you also want to get on that train and do things as well. But you're also aware of, you know, your own personal things, limitations and time and energy in that as well. But I've come to realize as well, like just in the last few months, that for me to get to where I want to be, I have to break that ceiling. And I can't allow it to keep me in my little container, and it's only me that's doing that. And it's all good to say it's only you holding about you, but you actually have to really, when you were talking about the discomfort, it's like, it's all good. Oh, you have to step outside my comfort zone, but there's a lot behind that, right? So having those supportive groups. So I guess my question is around, there's a couple of things, but it was like, what would you say to someone, you know, because I do it too. I'm like, step outside your comfort zone, gain that confidence. And we talk about that, but you get dragged in so easily, and it constantly, you think you've done a great job, and then you end up back here because something else triggers you, and it's because you've built this awareness of yourself, and now you've gone a little bit deeper. What would you say to someone that is sitting there right now and saying, I want to step outside my comfort zone, but every time I try, I get pulled back in? And maybe it's they're not around the right people, maybe it's that they don't understand they haven't got that awareness. What's a really simple little step that doesn't feel too scary that they could take?
Okay, great question, by the way. So I want you to imagine a circle, and inside of the circle is everything that you know, and outside of the circle is everything that you don't know. So inside the circle are things that represent comfort to you. They're easy. They're, you know, they're familiar. Outside of the circle are things that are not familiar. They're uncomfortable. And the line of the circle itself represents your potential. So you come across an opportunity or a challenge in your life, you're going to hit the edge of your circle. You have two choices: retreat into what you know, or go into the unknown. Now, every time you choose to retreat into what you know, you repeat a pattern that you've been repeating for probably years in your life. Every time you make a decision and you understand that you're at the edge of that circle, because you feel it, right? When you're at the edge of that circle, the edge of your potential, you feel it in your body, because there's this tension, there's this discomfort, there's this friction. And Robert Fritz, he says, all tension seeks resolution. So when you're at the edge of that circle, you've got tension as you're moving out of your circle, pulling you in. And when you come into your circle, you have tension that's pulling you out. Now, when you understand that as a mechanism, forget all the personal development language and the new age stuff that you have a block and you have it's confused people, and that confusion has caused stagnation. So let's look at it as a mechanism. That's how your brain works. It's just what's so. Let's address it like the matter of fact that it is. And when you understand the conditioning and the context that got created to cause all of that, that just helps you make decisions better. So when you're at the edge of that circle, you have a choice. Will you retreat and deal with the consequence of that same pattern, or will you make a different choice? Yeah. And it's a process. Every situation is that opportunity. And it's just, it's just you examining yourself.
I think realizing that, like you were saying, that you're in that circle is that identity or that paradigm that that is all there. And I think you have to have something that's strong enough. Like I find for myself, I have to have something that's like, no, I don't want to stay there. Like I love there, that's nice and fluffy, but I want to go here.
Yes.
And that potential part, because you really truly believe you have that potential, but you can feel there's this, and I love the fact that you shared that tension idea, because that's what it feels like in my body. It feels like that something is pulling or holding on that's a little bit stronger. But then when, like you mentioned, I think that you just know now that if you don't know something, or you feel unsupported, or there's something going on, you go looking for what that help is or support that you need, and you just go, I'm going to find it. And thankfully, like within your networks, I imagine what you're creating, you're able to find that. And I think that's, like Bobby was saying, there's like, having those people around you that are not constantly dragging you down and making you feel guilty. Because
you've got to be in nurturing soil, right? You have to be in nurturing soil. Nurturing soil are the people, the environment, and the resources that are going to support you. And you're right, you do need a goal that's going to compel you to be bigger than yourself. Because if it's just you, like how many times you want to get fit or you want to lose weight or whatever, and if it's just you, you're sleeping in. Those sneakers are staying at the door. But the minute that you have to account to somebody else and you got to be there for somebody else, then you're going to pull yourself out. And of course, there's a great book actually called The Four Tendencies, and it'd be a good read to be able to understand what motivates you. Are you somebody who actually delivers more for other people than you do for yourself, or how are you wired? And then that'll kind of help you set up the framework for what you need to do when you're hitting the edge of your circle.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
What's interesting about the circle, the comfort zone that we all talk about, and how, all the good things, all the things to change your life are outside of that. And I think what we forget is you're not leaving your comfort zone. Like, it's not you're leaving it. You're just expanding that.
You're expanding it.
If you imagine it as a computer game, if you ever played a computer game, you've got a world and you can only go to this part of the world until you've completed some tasks, and then the other part of the world is still open, then opens up when you've done those tasks. You can still go back to the other world. It's not that you're going to leave that totally and never be able to go and sit on your comfy sofa in a safe space again. It's okay to go into that little world a little bit and then come back. It's okay to do little tiny steps. And that's why we see these pictures on Facebook about the ladders of, someone's taking massive steps, someone's taking small steps. It's safer to take the small steps because it's just tiny little bits of growth. It's tiny little bits.
And you need time to integrate that as well.
That's right. It takes time.
Yeah. So I have two things about that. Before enlightenment, chop wood. After enlightenment, chop wood. Like that, that says it all. Yeah. And then I guess the other part is something else you said that made me think there, Bobby. I think I've lost it, but you were saying, so it expands your circle, right? And great example I heard on a podcast once. Why does a school teacher get paid, let's say $100,000, and a celebrity like an actor or an actress get paid millions and millions of dollars? What's the difference? You know, you would think that the value that a teacher is providing to young minds is far more valuable, right? But the reality is that that teacher is possibly impacting, what, 30 or 50 students, whereas the celebrity is impacting millions and millions of people, right? And when you think about that circle of influence, as COVID calls it, you know, every time you're meeting a challenge in life, you're expanding that circle. And every time you contract, when you hit the edge of your circle again, it's going to be the same problem or challenge or opportunity, just disguised as something else. But you're not going anywhere every time you contract, right? And in fact, you can go backwards as well. Yeah.
Right. And there's an interesting, you guys might know of it. It's about the story of the lamb in the oven. Have you heard about the story of the lamb in the oven, where the parents always used to cut the end of the lamb off it, and the child went, "Why do you always cut the end of the lamb off?" And she went, "Oh, that's what Mum used to do." So we went and asked the nan and went, "Nan, why do you always cut that off?" And he went, "Oh, that's what Mother Nan used to do." So sorry, my nan or my mum. And so that mum was alive. And so they went to the great nan, the great grandma, and went, "Why'd you cut the end of this off?" He said, "Oh, it's because it wouldn't fit in the oven. But now we have bigger ovens." And so just because we've done things or people have done things doesn't mean it's right. Doesn't mean it's the right way. And I wanted to touch on, you know, how we talk about, you know, how we are, we take in so much as a child, and we always look at our parents and go, you know, and we were talking about it before about the sea before we came on live. And I don't like the sea because my mum didn't like the sea, because we didn't live anywhere near the sea. She was always thinking, "Oh, it's horrible, there's things in there." And so I have that impression on me. And so, you know, for me to get over that, I've got to go more and more and more. And when I stop going, it doesn't take that long for me for that fear to come back again. But also we can pick up these things from our brothers and sisters. Like, how many times do you see a family with 3 brothers and sisters, let's just say, you're the youngest, the oldest is mega successful. And so you feel that pressure then, because you feel like you've got to go and do that when we don't have to do that. We are successful in many ways. We don't have to be that. And so I think that we're so impressionable through our younger years that we feel like that's the right thing, when that's just one way. That's just a small way of doing things. There's a million other ways. Doesn't mean that's the right way. And the beautiful thing about life is you can go and do that. You can go and try anything that you want, especially when you live in this amazing country. Like, nothing is stopping you. People think it is, but it's not. It's only your fears. How many times do we speak to people about starting a business? "Oh, I'm scary. I don't want to do that. It's safer to be in a job." It's not safer to be in a job. They can let you go at any point. You have no control over that. You have control over everything else. So, brothers and sisters I've got, Me and the Sea program. Anything else I've got in here? Like-minded people. Time and space. I want to talk about time and space. I never trusted myself until I started businesses, until I knew that I was good at doing something. I had confidence. And so I have confidence in my brain and what I do, but sometimes I'm too trusting of that. And so when I'm in a situation where I react instantly, when I should have taken some time, rather than what are your tips around that? Like, we're in a situation right now, like you had that confronting person when you were looking into that person's eye. Luckily enough, it was an organized situation where you weren't allowed to say anything anyway. So what would you do? You know, any tips around that and how we can take a bit more time rather than reacting straight away?
It's a muscle, right? It's a muscle. So start with making a decision. Yeah, I want to make a decision that this is not working for me and I need another way to be. And then it's just practice. And that's the transition, I suppose, or the process of going through awareness, is that initially, you know, we're not aware of stuff, and then we become aware of something, and then we get to this level where we almost become the observer and the participant at the same time. So we're watching ourselves do this thing that we didn't want to do, right? So it's a muscle and it's a process. So then you're going to practice. So you might be that you watch yourself do something that you didn't want to do, and you're in that automatic response. And then later on you reflect and you sort of think, right, how could I have handled that better? Because we do get caught off guard. Things happen. You know, I had a situation just recently where somebody asked me a question that just threw me completely off. right? And then I went to my network and was like, how do you answer this question? What are you doing? So just building that muscle and then practice and try things out. So sometimes you're going to say things and, you know, it's not going to land very well for you or for the other person. And then you might have to clean that up and be responsible for that you did that. And then, you know, you just try stuff. But so long as you're moving forward, and I think that a lot of the time when you're being responsible for your responses and they don't go according to plan, or they cause a reaction in somebody, then you know you can just say, okay, sorry, I didn't mean that, you know, and talk through, but keep talking and keep trying. Yeah.
I think that too. It's that, because you will make mistakes and you will upset others and you will do things and you're, oh gosh, why did I say that? It's not like you just get this awareness and then you're done, you're sitting pretty and you're amazing. You will have those times and you will, but I think it's also when you have more awareness, like you were sharing about your example and seeing that guy, it's been able to catch that really quickly, like being able to catch it quicker, or even if you react in such a way or respond in such a way, you catch that, and then making that decision, like you said, and then you're building that muscle. So I like the fact that you kind of give that idea of a muscle, because it doesn't always happen the way that you hope sometimes, and you think you've come really far, and then like you said, something happens and you're like, oh my goodness, like why am I like this? You're not blaming yourself. You have to show yourself compassion, but the only way to learn is to kind of question that rather than just pushing it away.
And sometimes just having a great laugh at yourself, you know, like, oh my God, what an idiot. You know, like, but not in a bad way, right? And as I said, like everything that's fundamental to what I teach is about that knowing thyself, loving thyself, accepting thyself. You're human. Cut yourself some slack, you know? Yeah.
I saw a very interesting TikTok. I love TikTok. It's gives me so many great ideas and there's so many great people on there. And it was about like how when we're young, we have a brain that has, if you imagine like a ski slope and no one's been on it and it's crisp snow. And so if you imagine that every time you do something, you go down on some skis and it creates that track and you keep doing the same thing and the track gets deeper and deeper and deeper. So by the time you come to 30, you're doing the same thing over and over again. That track is really, really deep, really deep. And so if you want to change that mindset and that thought process, you want to change that from that one thing to, let's say, the sea again, like I'm scared of the sea. That's been going on since I was 1. So that track is very, very deep. So for me to get out of that track, I've got to create a new one. But that new track will just be 1 day old. So you can imagine the impression of my brain is very, very small. So it's very easy to fall back into that one track. So like we say, it's a muscle. You've got to keep doing that thing over and over again. And if you've been doing that same thing for 40 years, you've got to do it more and more and more to get out of that track. And so we have to be more kind to ourselves, because we go, oh my God, this is not, this is not the reaction that I wanted or want to give. That's okay. It's gone now. You can't do anything about it. But you can change what goes happen in forward. But as long as I was saying it to one of our members, and she's going through a tough time at the moment, and because she thinks she should be here. And I was like, if you're 1% better today and you do that every day, you're 365% better. You don't have to be 365% better today, because that's crazy. Like, to put that pressure on yourself makes it so much easier just to be 1% better. And in time, that's the beautiful thing about time. If you keep doing it, it's going to get better and better. But you've got to keep doing that. I have enjoyed learning more about you and learning more about what you do, and I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your knowledge. If you would like to connect with Jenny, of course you can connect with her on LinkedIn. You've got the code, so you can reach out to myself or Karen. Will connect you as well. And Jenny, is there anything you want to say before we finish?
There is, Bobby, but I'm drawing a blank.
Okay.
I guess where I'm my ambition, my hope for people at the level of being human is that they learn to honor themselves, you know, and really understand, and like Karen was saying, have compassion and just be in love with yourself and in love with your life, you know.
Yeah, we should be the kings and queens of our lives.
Absolutely.
And with that comes that leadership, right?
It does.
It's not like saying I must be a leader. It's starting from that core awareness that you were saying, and with that, just naturally, you wake up one day and you feel like you're a leader of your life. It's not like it just happens, like Bobby was saying, right? It's not like you get the thing that's supposed to happen a year's time right now. It takes little steps, but it's the day you wake up and you just feel different.
Yeah.
And you just feel really just accepting, like you said, you know, you talked about self-acceptance being really key. I think it's those moments. And when you get those little steps, I think definitely what I find with my own journey is when you have those make those little steps and you have those moments of like, wow, that's what drives you to continue to keep going, even when it's hard. I think
all those little decisions when you hit the edge, like they're not always big decisions. They're not always big choices, you know, like saying no when you're confronted with it. It's not, it feels big, but you know, every time you can build that muscle, you're just chugging along, you know, you get there.
But can I quickly say, like, happy birthday to Bobby?
Oh yes, absolutely. Happy birthday, Bobby.
Thanks.
You're like, thanks so much.
Trying to work out how old I was. I've got to get the calculator out and work it out.
Oh, please. I'm sure you're younger than both of us together.
Yeah, totally.
I think it's like 51, I think. I'm not
Oh,
sure.
yeah, right.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Thanks again, Karen. Thank you for a wonderful year as well of the chat shows. We always learn. I feel a bit of a cheat sometimes because I get to learn from so many amazing people on these calls and the networking events I go to. I feel like I could be an expert in every industry just because of the amazing people that talk about what they do. So I appreciate you coming on the show. Have a great Christmas, everybody. Have a great New Year if you're watching this repeating. And we'll see you next time at Bobby's Business Club Chat Show. See